And also live and direct, we have Steve Hyde, who's sitting next to me, who is the CEO of the award-winning advertising agency Push Group, and you're a Google Premier Partner. And as before, please do ask questions after this session on slido.com using the hashtag WTM21. Cheers. So yes, we're just going to hand over to Steve Hyde, who's CEO of the advertising agency Push Group now. They're a Google Premier Partner, and he's going to share some travel success stories with you.
So when I put my presentation together, I actually did it independently of Jad, and it's totally coincidental that I came up with these three titles: speed, channels, and automation. Many of you here will already know that in the UK, 70 pence in every pound spent on advertising goes to digital. But if you're not aware of that, it's here, it's growing, it's speeding up. So let's talk about speed, because if there's only one message that I want to get across, it's that of speed. So this is an example of a business that we worked with about 12 years ago for a period of best part of 7 years. We took them from a family business of about 100 cottages to 1,000, and they eventually sold out. I'm still in good contact with the owner, or the ex-owner, David Hogarth. Great business, and the mantra that we always followed, if you took me away and interrogated me and gave me a truth bill, the most important thing that I'd get across to you is the importance of speed. When something new comes along, like whether it's a TikTok or a new program from Google, it's so important to try and test this quickly. So we prided ourselves, even though Lakes Cottage Holidays were smaller than their biggest competitor, on being the first to implement new tactics and new strategies. So we were the first to introduce remarketing in 2008. We were doing this ahead of big international companies for them. We introduced Facebook campaigns in 2009. If you think about it, many of you will know that Facebook only launched in the UK in 2007. So speed's vital. The reason that it's important is if you look at this chart here, this shows you the average cost per click for words related to Lake Cottage Holidays. No surprise that it goes up over time. As more people get interested in a particular marketing tactic, like Google AdWords, there's more inflation over time. So it's vital that what you all do as marketeers is that you introduce the new channels quickly. So whether it's Google coming up with something like remarketing, as they did in 2008, or a Facebook campaign or a TikTok campaign, key to go and move quickly. Taking Google alone, they have 300 beta tests, over 300 beta tests a year that they're rolling out. So it's so important to try those things quickly. Second point, and it might surprise you to hear Google telling you and recommending that you look at other channels, but they do, because they know it's in everyone's interest to do that. So for those of you that have been in marketing for a while, you'll recognize this kind of funnel. So it's classic attention, interest, desire, action. And the important message here is that those businesses that take the time to nurture and grow customer relationships right up and down the funnel see 50% more sales at a 33% lower cost. It's no good just running campaigns that are focused on action. Equally, it's no good just focusing on campaigns that are all about awareness. You have to have a mix and a blend. So businesses using these see a massive increase on purchase and engagement rates. By the way, these slides that I'm sharing with you, I'm very happy to share them with any of you later if you connect with me, LinkedIn, or just Google me. So it's Steve Hyde at Push. And each of the channels have different advantages over one another at different stages. You can see here awareness, YouTube, TikTok, display from Google, Facebook and Instagram. But you can see how this works and comes together. It's so important to get this mix right. To give you an example, I'll take a client of ours that we work with, Golf Breaks. It's a really good example in the travel sector. Been working with them for, I think, 6 years now. It's so important to take a multi-channel approach. If you think about their typical customer, well, it's very varied. They might have, on the one hand, a group of 4 or 5 guys that just want to spend a one-night staycation in say, the Belfry in England, or there might be a group of international travelers looking to play all the major courses in the USA. So massive differences in spend and demographic breakdown. So what we've done there, they have a wide variety of offerings. We need to be really fast and responsive. So for example, if you think of the January period when there's obviously so many people looking to make bookings, we need to look to see what changes there are in behavior from consumers in January and respond to them in a way that you can't do with so many traditional forms of media. So what we've done to support them, working with Google, is we helped launch in the US and Scandinavian market. So we had a 4-man sales team set up in Copenhagen and the East Coast. Google assisted us with market research to allow us to review specific campaigns in Danish and Swedish, and we introduced quickly 2 new websites. So within 2 years, the business units were taking over 1,000 bookings for domestic, long-haul, and high-value trips. So really important, good example of scale, and done very, very quickly. So Jad mentioned that we have now this very important access to what Google called the International Growth Program. If anyone's interested, this is what you can get out of it. It's identifying opportunities in markets, assessing markets, looking at your competition, looking at how you can go to market, localization, payments, customer experience, and of course, really trying to hone in on where the best opportunities are for you. Final point I'd make in time is the importance of automation. Now, automation is almost like the next big mantra. Many of us hear about Google once talked about that mobile is now. That was the phrase that was used in their head offices in Mountain View. They keep on saying mobile is now. Well, the phrase is AI is now. AI is here, and AI is helping us to automate campaigns. So there's an example of Emirates Airline. Can you just imagine how big those campaigns would need to be? So global paid search from 30 different markets, 85 countries. You can't manage that with just people without automation. So Anisha, who works out of Dubai in our team, built 50 new markets to increase regional and global sales. There's over 22 languages, and as I said, it's so important to have this working with an automated approach to the way that you manage and build those campaigns and respond at speed. If anyone has any questions, I think we may have a minute or two to do them. This is what we do: consultancy, training, digital marketing, execution. And as Jad said very early on, we are pleased to be one of the most awarded businesses out there in the agency sector in travel. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. I'm very grateful. It's Steve Hyde, and I work for Push. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Steve. I don't know if we've still got Jad online, but just in case we do, I'm just wondering, I don't know whether you can answer this or Jad's online to answer this, but have we seen any fall in the cost of ads over the pandemic? Because obviously we haven't been able to travel. Yeah. Lots of advertisers have pulled out of the market.
That's a really good question, and sometimes I say to people that I'm probably the one least able to answer any question in my business, being the oldest person. But the reality is, we did see a drop when the pandemic started. We saw a drop overall in costs because so many advertisers vacated all of the different platforms. So there was an initial drop, and still, if you do the maths. Still, digital is good value compared to other forms of traditional media. And what has happened is businesses have not migrated away from traditional media, print, radio, TV. They've not migrated away as quickly as the consumers have gone online.
And what about small companies? We often get lots of sort of small business owners here. So you mentioned sort of golf breaks there, but the tiny golf operator, for example. I mean, how would they sort of get into this? Because you were talking about that marketing funnel there. I mean, how can you do that as a small business owner? How would you work with someone like you, for example?
Well, I mean, first again, it probably comes back to helping work with automation as well. So that even businesses like ours, we have tools that work at a very low cost per month for a few £100 a month. it's very easy for businesses, if they have got low budgets, to try and work with a business like ours on all kind of budget levels. You would say, as far as how they would try and make things work, I think most people, I would always encourage them to just pick up the phone and make an inquiry. No one's going to start charging them money straight away for any business like that. But we've got clients that are spending less than $1,000 a month, up to clients spending $500,000 a month. So, and most agencies like us have that kind of range as well.
Great. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for now, Steve. So thank you for joining us and sharing that. And I'm sure you'll have picked up some good tips from Jad's presentation there. I think the one that I saw that was interesting was the destination insights and hotel insights. So do Google those, because they're free to access, and some really interesting information in there. And I'm sure Steve will stick around at the back afterwards if anybody wants to have any specific questions for him. So if we can put our hands together for Jad and Steve. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. If you want to take your mic off, that'd be great. Well, and I think Steve has left his jacket here, so he might have to come and collect that. Don't know if you're able to take that. Okay, so now we're going to get back to business. It'll be no surprise to anyone here that travel is at a torrid time and a horrid time during COVID, and because a business built on moving people from one place to another is always going to suffer when international borders are closed and when even local movement is restricted. Now, thankfully, things are opening up once again, and but we've lost some well-known names in travel over the past 18 months, laid low by the decimation of travel. Those that remain will be asking themselves about whether they can survive in this new world that we're coming in, and whether longer-term issues such as the climate crisis will be a fatal blow to its seriously injured body. Travel survives on challenges, though, and we're a positive bunch. So this following session is dedicated to looking at how the industry can fix its broken business model for the year ahead, 2022. And I'm delighted to be joined by an illustrious panel to discuss this, and I'd just like to invite them to join me on stage now. So we have Adam Armstrong, who's CEO of Kentucky Holidays. Sophie Deckers, Chief Commercial Officer of EasyJet. David Goodger, Director of Tourism Economics from Oxford Economics. And last but not least, Julia Bouet Said, CEO of the Advantage Travel Partnership. Thank you. And once again, don't forget you can ask questions all the way through this session on slido.com using the hashtag WTM21. So now let's get down to business. So David, so what can you tell us about the state of travel and tourism's economics? I mean, I know it won't be far from people's minds in this room, but through COVID and looking to the future, should we be worried?
Yeah, I think you've summarised some of the concerns out there. If I can give a typical economist's answer and just say, on the one hand, yes, we should be worried, but on the other, there is plenty of scope for optimism. I think we all know what has happened over the last 18 months or so. The huge falls in activity and the job losses that have entailed. The business has been lost, as well as a lot of the social issues that entails. With on the plus side, travel and tourism is a great job creation sector, offers lots of opportunities for youth workers, women, minorities, but it has been a lot of those that have suffered, and there's a lot of bad stories. But to turn to the positive, we're very optimistic that actually we are past the worst, and we are seeing growth coming ahead. If we look at a lot of the fundamental drivers, the macroeconomic environment behind it that we always look at as we're forecasting tourism, there's some really positive trends out there. Economy's rebounding. It's a consumer-led boom that we're looking at right now. People have had lots of enforced savings, and it's that saving that they're now starting to spend. And now that they're able to get out and travel, they're spending it on travel. We're seeing this as travel restrictions been eased throughout this year. It's been followed by all these spikes in bookings, and we expect that to continue to next year. And so, the year ahead, we do expect to see much, much stronger activity. real room for optimism going on then there. Still some concerns out there, possible capacity issues, staff shortages, some of the businesses that have been affected. Bit longer run, I think one of the other concerns I just want to mention would be what's happening in terms of pricing. The past 10 years has been driven by a lot of increased affordability, lower prices. We might be seeing turning a corner on that as there's large amounts of debt that need to be repaid, plus the sustainability agenda, as you've mentioned, there could be some new costs coming down the line.
And I know there's often sort of bandied about figure of GDP, 10% of GDP, global GDP in travel and tourism. I mean, do you think we'll get back to that position?
Yes, but not immediately. I think it's not wouldn't necessarily be a 2022 prediction, but over the longer run, yeah, absolutely. There's no reason why we can't get back to that. Maybe some changes within the composition of it.
I just want to talk about your sectors in particular here now. So starting with you, Sophie, from EasyJet, low-cost carrier, although I don't know whether we should call it that so much anymore. But, you've seen some increased demand as soon as borders have opened. I mean, do you think the traditional business model that you've followed over the years has been broken by COVID now, or are they going to come back as they did before?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't think it's broken. I think actually we have benefited from some of the things we've had to implement during the last 18 months. So one of the things is around network agility. We've had to be much more agile and incorporate new processes where we can change capacity at much shorter notice than we've ever done before. Normally we're planning 18, 24 months out. So I think if anything, that agility is definitely something that we have learnt a lot from. I mean, initially it was quite chaotic agility, and now it's more structured agility, and how do we keep some of that agility going forward? So I think if anything, that strengthened partly our business model. The other part is around digital and the way we interact with customers, the fact that customers can engage much more through the app. They've been able to process refunds, been able to verify and use their credit notes through the app, and we've shifted and accelerated a lot of the digital development we were going to do as well. In terms of the network, we've been able, I mean, we're fortunate and unfortunate. We're fortunate that we have a domestic footprint, so we've been able to skew a bit that way, but we're unfortunate we're very exposed to the UK. And in the UK, as anyone knows, we've had over 50 different changes in government restrictions changing constantly, and so we've been much harder hit. So I'm not saying it's been a breeze. We've learnt some really good stuff through agility and digital, but the network piece, I think, will be an interesting one for us to maybe to discuss in a minute, but I think is an interesting one going forward. I don't think it's broken. I think we've learnt, and I think we've benefited, and we will come out stronger from it, but it has been very painful.
David was just talking there about, we've been sort of weaned on low-cost travel over the past decade, and you've been very much behind that. I mean, do you think we're going to see rising prices as a result of that, as you try to sort of regain that? I mean, you have got the liquidity, but to pay some of those debts back, and not just EasyJet, but people in general.
Yeah, do you know what, I think we'd, as an industry, we'd love to charge more, obviously, because we'd make more money, but the reality is it's all demand-driven. I've actually got my CFO saying to me, we've got 40% higher navigation charges facing us next year, we've got higher fuel charges facing us next year, how much can we pass through to the customer? And I'm saying, we can't. Customers will pay what they believe is the right price, however much, and if we push the prices up, they'll stop buying. So it really is a demand-led industry, and you have some control over pricing, but the reality is we can't push through all of those cost headwinds, which is why recovery will take longer to come back, because we are going to be facing a lot higher costs, even with some of the the pent-up demand that we've got. We've got these massive cost headwinds hitting us now.
Adam, can I come to you on this? I mean, do you think travel's business model is broken, and particularly in your sector, I mean, adventure, tourism, groups, that sort of thing?
Broken sounds very dramatic, doesn't it? I think it's bruised, but it's been bruised before. We've had, the travel industry's got a long history of recovering and the bruise healing. September 11th, Gulf War, SARS, and so on. So we've been through all this before. This is probably the biggest so far. But the bruise heals. The skin looks, I'm sorry, I'm using a silly analogy here, but the skin may not look as beautiful and it's the same color as it was before, but we take that time to reflect. So, yeah, we've had some challenges, but we're a tour operator, multi-country coach trips generally for the youth market. It's been really, really tough for us. We haven't been able to do multi-country trips because crossing borders has been difficult. So we've been agile in our product this year. That will dissipate next year. The biggest challenge for us, or one of the bigger challenges for us, has been distribution, and particularly in the UK market, where some big travel agents have disappeared or downsized, or disappeared, like STA Travel, which was big for us. Our distribution has completely flipped. So we've been very reliant upon the trade, and rightly so. But during COVID, we've flipped to being reliant on direct business, and we weren't quite ready for that. So that's agitated our minds to get into that space a little bit more. And then, other than distribution, we've been looking on our product, and we've been looking at terms and conditions and booking flexibility, which the airlines have been doing as well. There's never been a better time for a consumer to buy a travel product, because you can get low deposits, you can pay later, you can change, you can cancel. It's so flexible. It's kind of good. It's really good now. Life is good now for the consumer. I don't think that will change forever, but that's just one of the things that will come out of this slightly differently than when we came in.
And just to ask you the same question, are prices going to go up?
Oh, same as Sophie. We want our prices to go up because we want to make a little bit more money and pay back everything that we've lost. But look, I think it's mixed. I think it's a broad church. We've got some destinations, some hoteliers, some suppliers who've had a bad year this year, and they are, I think, generally more inclined to keep their prices stable for next year. And then on the other end, we've got countries, islands, regions that have had a really good year this year, and they've whacked their prices up. And we're trying to take some of that, absorb some of that ourselves. I think 2022, we're going to see that disparity, and then it will level out in 2023. So we're trying not to get our prices up, but some of the price increases have been significant, 30, 40%, and we can't absorb that. So some prices will go up, others will stay the same, and we'll find an equilibrium by 23, 24.
Julia, I want to come to you. People will probably recognize Julia. You've been a regular face on television and the voice on the radio over the past 18 months, being a very sober and a promoting voice for the travel industry. And I'm sure we all appreciate that you've done that. And I just want to ask about the travel agency side of the business. You represent lots of travel agents, both in the leisure and business travel sectors. I mean, do you think travel agents are going to get through this? I mean, we've seen lots of high-profile failures over the last 18 months, and there may be more to come with bonding and things like that. So do you think it's suffered a fatal blow, the travel agency sector?
Definitely not fatal. I think Adam, in terms of his distribution strategy, should have probably spoken to different types of agents, because I think certainly there are incredible agents out there who will withstand the bruising that we've been through. I think like everyone has said it already without sounding like a broken record and repeating, it's an opportunity to change, an opportunity to learn, but it's an opportunity to make sure the elements that are broken, because I think there are elements in our infrastructure, if you like, that are broken, that we use the time now and opportunity to fix them. So I think, like every other sector, there will be, unfortunately, probably some more failures. I don't think every business can withstand it. We've still got a tough winter to get through. I keep getting asked, is life back to normal? Of course it's not back to normal. It won't be back. You can't undo 20 months of devastation and debt that's piling onto a business. But I think the outlook is positive. I completely agree in terms of what we're seeing in terms of that optimism. Consumers are optimistic. There's more money out there. But from a business point of view, there's a lot of fixing we need to do to make sure businesses can withstand, a winter and with all the other challenges that we've got in terms of the environment that we're operating in.
And can we speak just briefly about business travel and that business travel sector? Because you and I talk a lot about that sector. They've had a slightly different set of challenges from the leisure market. They haven't, in general, they've not been able to do anything at all, not making any money, but they're actually having to do lots of repatriation of people who've been out in these countries. And, it's been hugely challenging for them. And they haven't been able to access some of the funding that others have. I mean, what's the outlook for travel management companies and business travel agencies?
I think like every other part of the business, they've had to pivot, and they're having to now really consult and work in a very different way with their corporates and the travellers around demonstrating that extra value around duty of care, hand-holding, automation, technology that they can really develop. I don't agree with business travel. There's a lot of talk about business travel is dead. It definitely is not dead. It's changing. The big issue you've got is people's budgets. Their T&E has been cut, so people aren't travelling, not because, I'm generalising, corporates don't want their travellers to travel. They don't have the budgets to travel. So, and travel will be different, and it will change, and the length of journeys will change, and how long you go for, where you travel, how you travel, that's going to change. But there's a more consultative conversation, dialogue that TMCs can have with their corporates and add huge amounts more value than ever before. Travel is complicated, and it will continue being complicated, and everyone has a responsibility to make that traveller journey even more seamless and frictionless, and TMCs or leisure agents are in the right place to do it.
Now, we heard in Google's session there about the rise in staycations, but traditionally the industry is very reliant on the airline networks, and a huge proportion of the cost of these holidays and trips is going to be coming from that. And we've seen lots of changes as a result of COVID because of that. Airlines reducing the size of their planes, for example, reducing the frequency on certain routes, and also cutting the less popular routes. And David, I just wanted to talk to you about that, about airline economics. I mean, do you think that some of those changes that have happened are here to stay now?
Yeah, I think so. Some, maybe not all of them, but definitely some. I think one of the biggest themes we're seeing, as we're coming out of the pandemic, is any of the changes that are coming, we're kind of sort of had their roots before the pandemic, and that it's really accelerated some of the previous trends. It's just given people that, that pause, allowed people to, businesses, travelers themselves, that chance to sort of reconsider their relationship with travel, reconsider the ways of doing things. And so we're coming out slightly differently, but it is in terms of some of the changes that were already there, and some of those network things that we were already seeing, some increase in some more point-to-point travel rather than some of the traditional network models. And that, I don't know, I may be sitting next to someone more knowledgeable than me on this, but definitely what we're seeing is that all different routes need to justify their existence right now, and I think that is a trend. We will get back to some more connectivity in some network routes, but it is going to be that change to say that all routes do need to justify their existence, particularly with some of the sustainability agendas and some of the the business travel effects that we've been looking at.
So on that note, Sophie, I mean, looking at your results over the last year, there's been a lot of talk about how you're well placed to take advantage of this new environment, and perhaps that you'll be, the exit from the market of some of your competitors, for example, Norwegian on, some of the routes, and, and some of the other carriers as well. They've pulled off routes that are perhaps a bit less profitable, but your argument is that you're, much more agile and can, go back onto those. I mean, would you say that you think there's a good opportunity for you to come onto there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I absolutely echo what David says. We'll only operate something if we think it's going to be profitable, and if someone like Norwegian or whoever's dropped it, then it's likely that it wouldn't be that profitable. Otherwise, we'd already be operating it ourselves, probably. But I do think there's definitely opportunities for us where legacy carriers are coming out of primary airports, and we're fortunate that 70% of our capacity is on slot-constrained airports where those legacy carriers are operating. So there'll definitely be some backfill opportunities, I think, on point-to-point European short-haul travel. Interestingly, this year we tried to tap into that staycation opportunity, and we launched 11 UK routes that we wouldn't have done normally, and they performed quite well. So it'll be interesting next year to see how much of that we keep, because they're relatively short sectors, and we've been able to do things like Glasgow, Bournemouth, or Edinburgh, Newquay, for example. And I do think it'll be interesting to see from a traveller perspective how many have been put off this year by the cost of accommodation in the UK, which was quite extortionate. The UK weather actually worked in our favour this year from a travel industry perspective, because I think people will not risk it next year. But yes, absolutely, there's going to be opportunities for us in primary airports. There'll be opportunities for us to try new things, but we only try new things where we think they're going to make money. We typically let a route mature over 3 years, so we won't just try something and drop it. We look at a 3-year maturity curve, and so we will only invest properly where we think it's going to make that money over that length of time. I think in terms of network, we're still focused on Europe. We still think there's loads to go after within Europe, and that's kind of going to still be our focus for next summer and beyond. But I do think the demand's going to be there. It's definitely much more on leisure at the moment, on longer leisure breaks than city breaks. But as testing drops away, I think more people will be encouraged to do the city breaks. But that's going to hurt us this winter, I think, as an industry, because I think those normal city breaks, the Oktoberfest we've kind of missed, things like German Christmas markets, those sorts of things, I don't think are going to be that popular this year, which is a shame because we rely on those sorts of events for the winter to get us through. Fingers crossed for snow for the new year, because I know you probably want that too. But that could be a really good opportunity. You've got 2 years of pent-up demand of people, skiers are desperate to go skiing. So we can see that being positive to carry us into the new year. But at the moment, the majority of bookings are still for travel within the next 3 months. About 70% of our bookings are for travel within the next 3 months, which is so much closer in than we've normally seen. So we have very little visibility beyond that. So it's all hypotheses and kind of a bit of a gamble of where you put your network. But that's our approach.
Adam, I was just wanting to talk to you about demand. I mean, have you seen increased demand since the restrictions have fallen away slightly, and is the demand there for the same products than you saw before?
Yeah, demand is increasing. It's not quite back to where I'd like it. We'd all like it to be better. We just had October was our best booking month since the beginning of the pandemic. So we're kind of quietly pleased with ourselves, but it's still less than half of what it needs to be. In fact, it's less than a third of what it needs to be. But we're seeing, as markets start opening, as countries start opening, we start to see spikes. So October spike was largely driven by Australia opening up again. So we had Qantas's first aircraft landed in London this morning. And all those announcements just leads to, gives momentum to Aussies to book. But overall, if I was to summarize last month, the trend is there is no trend. People are just booking all over the shop. And from 1 week to the next, one day to the next, we just can't predict what people are going to book. So it's kind of like they've thrown all the cards in the air and we're just waiting to see where they land. 2022 is going to be a relatively challenging year for us in terms of predicting where people are going to travel and which trips we can operate and which ones we have to pull the plug on, compounded by people booking a bit later than they normally do. But yes, demand is coming back. It's not quite where it needs to be, but I'm optimistic as we get into cyber sale or Black Friday or whatever you call it later this month, and then the Christmas sales, the Boxing Day sales and so on. I'm quietly optimistic.
Julia, could I ask you about that? I mean, you represent across the whole market. I mean, what are your members saying to you that are actually proving popular? I mean, we saw staycations in the previous section, but what are you seeing from your members?
Yeah, I mean, staycations were popular because, in all due respect to our beautiful island, it was the only place we could really sell this summer, so that drove a purpose. We're seeing, I mean, last couple of weeks where US is now, obviously the announcement after the US, that's dramatically changed our booking patterns overnight. Really interesting what Sophie was saying in terms of the booking patterns. We did see that, but the last couple of weeks we've seen a completely different shift where around 60% of what we're selling is now for next year, now that half term is out of the way. And the US now, it was around our 8th best-selling destination between this year and next. It's now our 2nd. So the US, also for business travel, has changed the dynamic completely. So every time, I think Adam was saying, every time a destination launches or every time there's different restrictions that change, it dramatically changes the picture in terms of the trend of what's being booked. Yeah, next year is looking really positive. We've got about 20% of what we're selling is for the remainder of this year, but also a healthy amount already for 2023, particularly on leisure. So I think as we see more restrictions easing, then it will become. But I think the interesting discussion is actually the discussions used to be, when do I want to travel, where do I want to go, and what can I do when I get there? The discussions are now, what's your vaccination status? And we are now, fortunately or unfortunately, depends on how you look at it, it's all about what's your vaccination status, and therefore, what am I going to have to comply with to come back at home, but also where can I go? So there's very different conversations that are driving the trends now, which is something we have to be cognizant of as well.
I mean, I just got back from a trip at the weekend, and I'm a fairly well-seasoned traveller, and it was really difficult filling in the forms and making sure I had all those proof and things. Does more need to be done, do you think, from governments and authorities to make that easier? Just because, I can see, I would do it, but lots of people might not want to do it.
Oh, don't get me started. We have not enough time to talk about that at all. There's a huge amount that needs to be done by our government, other governments, collaboration, these forms, the purpose of them. There's a huge amount that has to be done to get us back into more frictionless travel, without a question of a doubt. We're on that trajectory now, but we're nowhere near where it needs to be at all. So yeah, huge amount needs to be done, but more consultation with industry, but also cross governments. There has to be more of that happening.
Yeah. Would you agree, Sophie, on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And from personal experience of travelling through Farah Airport this week with a 1-year-old that wants to run around and spending 2 hours in a passport control queue because they're trying to check the paperwork, it's not a great experience. It's really just not a great experience. So, and there is a consistency issue, and children being vaccinated between 12 and 18 years old, only being vaccinated once means they're not actually vaccinated. They then need to have PCR tests before they travel. All of these things just add to that confusion and lack of consistency across the markets as well. It makes it very difficult. We're seasoned travellers, and even I was debating now whether I want to travel just after Christmas or not because of the extra stress. So I do think there needs to be that. And I also, I know we're all probably aligned in urging the government to they're talking about removing the whole requirement for testing sometime in the new year. We're all saying make that announcement in December because the key booking period is that Christmas Day, Boxing Day, just after Christmas. If that announcement was made before then, that would be brilliant because people could then book with much more confidence than they've been able to. So that's certainly something we're lobbying for, is to have that decision before Christmas so we can take advantage of that peak booking period. But yeah, speaking from experience, it's not easy.
We've had some questions in from the audience, and Janet, thank you, and I don't know where you are, but she says, as an independent travel agent, she's just had her best ever sales month, which is great, well done, but she's concerned that other countries may close their borders with our high COVID levels. Are you concerned?
I think it's always going to be a concern. I mean, we saw not quite closed borders, but Morocco suspend their direct flights recently. You can, and I don't quite understand the logic, you can fly indirect, but you can't fly direct, but that's, their decision. I think we all have to be concerned. We've just been through 20 months of turmoil and changing restrictions and border closures. We don't want to go there again. The signs are looking good, our rates are coming down, but yeah, who's to say that won't change? But I think just kind of on that, but not related, I think for independent travel agents now has never been a better time to really show the value that you present, whether it's business or leisure. So I think, I don't know Janet or agent Janet is, but I think, good on her that she's had her best month, and I think that will continue. And the more complicated travel is, unfortunately, we don't want that, but it does really, fall into the hands of travel agents to help make that experience more seamless and educate. From an educational point of view, it helps that hand-holding process.
Dave, there are many destinations that rely almost entirely on tourism. You think of like Caribbean, Pacific nations, and it's obviously been very difficult for them. Both as a health crisis, but also from an economic crisis for them. For some of them, it's like 60% of their GDP. I mean, do you think? Or can you tell us what's happened to them and how they're going to get out of it? Are they going to try and spend their way out of it to try and win back a bigger share of the market when borders are open again?
Yes, it's an interesting case, and yeah, there are some that are hugely reliant. I don't think there's one single answer, unfortunately, that you can give. Every country is different, and we've seen that in terms of the response. Some have been really quick to push the vaccinations, try and comply. Others have been just open borders, whatever. Others have gone for testing, more and more testing, and that does actually add to some of the complications that we've talked about, that there are this real patchwork of different regulations and different forms to fill in as you go to different destinations, and the hope is that there is more alignment as we go through in the future. In terms of the future for all these destinations, I think travel and tourism has to be part of their future. It is has proved to be such a big job creator in the past, and it's still got that role to play, and it's got to be part of the future for these destinations. But there will be changes. We've talked about some of these changes that are already taking place. Business travel is going to be slower to come back. It is that leisure will need to be the focus, at least in the first instance. But there is also this change that we're seeing that did have its roots pre-pandemic, which does touch on some of the over-tourism debate and some of the sustainability issues that I think destinations need to be having these big conversations internally, and spending their way out of it, giving that support is part of it, but there needs to be that important conversation and looking at what's the the value per person to all of the to that destination. A lot of destinations were already going down that route of trying to get the higher value tourism, maybe get people that stay shorter length of time but just spend more while they're in there, take place, more activities, the higher value travel. I think that's something that a lot of destinations are going to be trying to capture going forward, and it may unfortunately play into what we're talking about with the higher pricing coming down the line that will actually necessitate going in that direction.
Adam, can I talk to you? I mean, obviously you go to multiple destinations with your tours. How have you worked with some of those sort of local operations, that you've worked with over the years, and have been having challenges all the way through COVID? Have they all survived, and have you continued to support them during this process?
In the main, most have survived. I think Julia said, we've got a tough winter ahead, and some more suppliers may not survive the winter because they don't have the cash flow to get them through to the busy peak summer for Northern Hemisphere. But yeah, most of them have survived by downsizing, and we will work with probably more than 80-90% of the same suppliers as we worked with previously. But we have lost some, and it's been it's forced us to realign and find some other hotels, some other local experiences. But in the main, we're still working with most of the same people.
We've had a question from the audience for you. So with group travel, how are you navigating restrictions when planning your departures? Because obviously, that's really complicated when you're doing a multiple country itinerary.
Well, we haven't operated a multi-country trip yet this year. So we're about to, touch wood, in December. So yeah, we're normally operating trips of 10 to 15 countries in one trip. What we've operated all throughout this year, and especially in Europe, is single destination or single country trips. So traveling around the Greek islands, traveling around Italy, traveling around Portugal. We just haven't had the confidence with government to be able to say with certainty that a trip will operate. With hindsight, we could have operated quite a bit, but we just didn't have that long-term view that 15 countries would be open, even 5 countries would be open, and it would be easy to get across the border. So I look excitedly towards December the 11th when we operate our first multi-country trip, but with some trepidation because everything's good now. But the one country in there that I happen to live in, Switzerland, doesn't now accept the NHS app as your proof of vaccination. So go figure. We've got all these little curveballs to contend with. But I think by April, May next year, we'll be back to multi-country touring as we were in 2019.
Julia, I just want to come back to business travel. Right at the start of the pandemic, Bill Gates came out and said he thought that 50% of business travel would disappear as a result of the pandemic. And he would say that, wouldn't he? Because he owns Microsoft Teams. So what's your view on that? Do you think it will return to higher levels than that? Or?
I think it will return. I mean, I don't see it from all the conversations we have. I don't think it's going to return to the levels it was. It's changed. I mean, we can't forget how the world has changed. So, and actually, there are some really positives that we can gain from how we can work now and how we can operate now. How our people don't have to be flying around the country on very short visits. They can do that from remotely. But I think I said it earlier. Business travel has changed, but it doesn't mean it's changed just because it's less volume. It doesn't mean people are making less money or it's a less effective trip. So face-to-face is still really important. That's not going to go away. We've got a hybrid model going on here today. It's still really important. And businesses don't need those relationships, those face-to-face. So I think business travel short term, we are going to see it reduce, and it will continue being reduced. As I said, the budgets are not there to enable travellers to travel as they were travelling. We've got to be prepared to operate in a different way. And I think Sophie used the word agility before. Well, it's no different to any business putting their policies in place now. You do it with agility, knowing that things will change, and at some point it will start to ramp up again. So I think it's changed probably forever, but that's not necessarily a bad thing in terms of the volume. I think you just operate it in a very different way.
David, I know that you disagree with Bill Gates on this question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we put out a blog post, early days. Yeah, disagreeing with that. I thought you were going to say I was disagreeing with Julie, but no, absolutely agree with everything that you just said there. Yeah, it's we see a return to growth in business travel. There's absolutely value in business travel. I think everyone here will agree that. It's fantastic to see how many people are here today. I've taken part in hybrid events as well, sort of on the from the dialing in side of things as well, and just seeing people in the room. There is the fear of missing out, and I think that's something that's going to drive some of the travel. You want to be part of those conversations over coffee. Salespeople are going to see their rivals going to meet clients, and they're going to have to do it, and that's going to be that push to push those travel budgets back up. And it's not back to the same trajectory it was. It's a lower trajectory, but we do see it returning slower than leisure, but we do see it getting back to around the levels of 2019 in time. Not an immediate thing, not the same model, but it is still returning. Whether it's sending fewer people to these sorts of events, or having just one salesperson rather than engineers or other experts going to these sales meetings. But there is absolutely a space and a need for business travel to return.
Sophie, we talked a bit earlier about companies disappearing in the pandemic. I mean, do you think we're going to see more of them disappear? I mean, do you, as EasyJet, sort of actually sort of assess the viability of some of these companies before you start working with them? And do you have to take more measures now just to make sure that they are going to be still there in 5 months' time?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, by companies, I guess, if we talk about suppliers, I mean, there has been consolidation in suppliers, and to a certain extent, we've had to insource some things like engineering, because there has been a reduction in the amount of engineering capacity that is in the market. And so, you imagine a lot of these engineering companies are relying on having a number of aircraft coming in, and they just haven't had them, so they have collapsed. So we have had to insource on engineering in particular. I think one of the things we're doing is when we work with people like Advantage is we work constructively together. So we have the API link. We want to work with travel providers. We want to work with OTAs, and we want to do it in a constructive way rather than the other way that other people might do, which is to kind of cut them off at the knees. Actually, we do want to work in partnership, and I think that's worked well through the pandemic. I think things like, interestingly, EasyJet Holidays actually is doing really, really well, because there's a bit of a shift towards people wanting to book packages now to have that reassurance. And actually, we've got from third-party suppliers, if you think about holidays, we've got hoteliers who really want to work with us, because actually we operate a year-round schedule, and we operate multi-frequencies by day of week. So you're not looking at traditional 7-14 night breaks. You can do things that are kind of more mix and match, and you can build in different itineraries as well. So actually we're in a strong position, and we're actually seeing a lot of the hoteliers kind of proactively coming to us now to say, we want to partner with you. You can give us seats. You can fly people in off peak in the winter. You can help build the season beyond where it is at the moment. So I think we've seen some pockets within the industry where the supply mix has changed slightly, but generally most that we've been working with are still there.
Adam, I just wanted to come to you on, we talked about flexibility, cancellation policies and things like that before. I mean, do you think, that those have changed irrevocably now because people, consumers are expecting to have that flexibility, or will we ever be able to roll those back? And then more generally, do you think we need to sort of change the model of payment and remuneration in the industry, so where the money flows to and at what point to enable it to survive?
My personal prediction is that we won't get quite back to the level of inflexibility as the industry had in 2019, where we all went very flexible during COVID because we all wanted bookings, we all wanted cash flow. and they're going. I just can't see that we'll all go back to where we were, but I think we'll reach some middle ground. Just yesterday, we rolled back to factory settings on our deposits and our balance due date. So we've had low deposits and a later balance payment all throughout the pandemic, and we think the time's right now. And so that we flicked the switch yesterday, but we're not going to go back to our full stricter conditions. The second part of the question was around who holds the funds. I don't know that I'm qualified enough to talk about that in the UK market, and I appreciate that there's been quite a bit of chatter around that. What I think the industry needs to do a better job of, and I think Sophie, you've already alluded to it, is the travel industry. All of our businesses, be us travel agents, tour operators, airlines, hotels, we're all built to go very quickly forward and taking money and making bookings. We weren't built to go backwards and refund or credit bookings. So it's not, to use a car analogy, there's 6 gears on the car to get you to go really fast, and that's what we built our systems around: is putting inventory on sale, great product, get the booking, take the deposit, take the payment, and off you go on holiday. We just didn't invest much in going backwards. And I think most of us have now fixed that, spent this downtime to fix that, so that when things do go bump in the night, we can respond quickly through apps, rather than having to call and sit on the phone for 2 or 3 hours to speak to a human being. So I think that's the big change, but I'd probably refer to maybe Julia to talk about where the money sits.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Julia.
Oh, before I do, what I would say on that is it would certainly help the consumer if they knew where the money sits. I think that's part of the problem, is the consumer doesn't know whether it still sits with the agent, with the tour operator or the airline. There's a bit of confusion there, and then that sends them, they're talking to all these different parties trying to work out who's actually got the money.
Yeah, it's really complicated, actually, I think, in the UK. So in simple terms, if you book with an agent, the agent has passed that money on to the tour operator, and then you may have booked with the airline. So you've got this massive chain that, in what we've had to experience has just collapsed. So I think, in real term, in normal trading environment times, you book with a travel agent, and again, it depends what you've booked. If it's atolls, if it's not atolls, it's so complicated. But let's speak generally. If you book a package holiday which is atoll protected, you'll pay the agent. The agent, the money's gone from the agent, it reaches the tour operator then pays its suppliers, but it depends when you've booked. I think what's happened what the pandemic has shown when you're going backwards is actually the flow of money just sitting at the top, and it's not flowing down for all the reasons we know. So that's the bit that needs working on. But the other side of it also is, and what isn't really visible and known I think even in our market, is if you book with a travel agent, depending on who that travel agent is a member of, if they've got a trust facility, and where does that money sit with that travel provider, So if you book the travel agent and the money sits in trust, what kind of trust is it? What does that look like? What monies are protected? So it's so complicated. So from a consumer, it's not easy for a consumer to think, if I book something, what protection I've got. The consumer, we've taught the consumer, and obviously we've got great consumer protection here in the UK, that if they book the credit card, their money's protected. But I think in the travel sphere, it's very, very complex, and I think that's one of the things that we have to work through, a clear message to the consumer, so they know exactly what is financially protected and what isn't.
We're running out of time here, but I do want to have one last question talking about the elephant in the room. It can't have escaped anyone's notice that it's COP26 on at the moment, and sustainability. We need to talk about that, and in fact, 3/4 of the questions that we've had are all about sustainability. So and Greta's refocused our minds on this, and some argue that COVID was caused by climate change. Our thoughts about sustainability are going to cause a body blow for travel and tourism, or can we learn to travel in a sustainable way? Sophie?
Yeah, so I think I think it's the right challenge and it's the right conversation to be having. It's not a new conversation. I think that's key, and it was one that was a very live conversation even before COVID hit. We carbon offset every single flight. It used to be you could tick a box if you wanted to carbon offset, and you paid, what was it, £3.26 or whatever the calculation was. We now just carbon offset every single passenger, and we were the first airline to do that because we think it's the right thing to do. There's obviously lots of talk about fuel and different types of fuels and SAFs. Ultimately, we need to be investing, and what we're lobbying government is to be investing in the ultimate, which is a electric aircraft. We're working with Airbus. I mean, obviously, that's something that is slightly further away than we'd like it to be, but is something we're all working collectively as an industry on. So I think that the first step is offsetting our carbon emissions in the right way and investing in the right programs that actually do make a difference. The second is then obviously alternative fuels, and the third is ultimately some form of electric aircraft.
Adam, do you think Gen Z really care about sustainability?
They do, okay, but they don't all care about it to the same degree. So it's a continuum, right? But I'd say roughly, half to 2/3 really care about it, and they will make a conscious decision to travel with an airline, to book with a tour operator that has a view, has a sustainability strategy. So we'll be carbon neutral next year. We have a climate action plan. We adhere to 11 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. But what I would say for those half to 2/3 of Gen Z people who really value this, it's just table stakes, right? So you don't go shouting about it. They just expect it. There are other things that they're more interested, more excited about, i.e. where you're going and what you're going to do when you get there. So the lesson we've learned in the last 6 months is it's just expected. You just got to do these things. And by the way, what are you doing next? Okay, you're doing some carbon offsetting, which we're doing as well. But what's next? What's next? It's a journey, right? So it doesn't end with carbon offsetting. It's what are you doing next?
And last word to you, David. I mean, do you think we can build an economic model that includes sustainability and travel?
Yes, I think we can. Yeah, it's something we're doing. A lot more work on researching, and going to start tracking how this is changing over time. And it's great to hear all these different developments. We're seeing lots of other things that are taking place. There is lots of developments coming. It's going to take a long time for all of the new technologies, though. I think it is one of the things that we will start to see some pricing coming in at some point. At what level, we don't know. We may hear some announcement this week. I think overall, whether we're a bit more cynical or not, I don't know. We just believe, don't necessarily see that there's going to be wholesale change in behaviour without any sort of price stimulus. There's a lot of people talking about it. Yes, there is some. A lot of people are actually following up on it, but for a lot of people, it is still lip service, and we don't see wholesale changes in behaviour unless governments do actually start putting seriously large carbon taxes in place, which will be another set of challenges for the industry, no doubt. But longer run, then there will be the technological solutions.
Brilliant. Well, that's all we have time for today, unfortunately. Thank you for all of your questions in the audience, and I'd like to ask the audience to join me in thanking Adam Armstrong, Sophie Deckers, David Goodger, and Julia Low-Boué Said for sharing their insights. Thank you very much.